Okay, we are live. Good morning, guys. Good to see everybody. Last weekend of May. Hope you guys had a good Memorial Day. And we're going to talk today about pelvic floor. So I put in the caption at the bottom, or the description. If you're not using pelvic floor when you sing and you don't know how to do that, then you're missing out on 50% of what you need to create stability in your breath support. So when we talk about pelvic floor in singing, we are talking about your breath support and what we need to do to be able to understand the bottom of the container of support. So if you guys follow my content, if you've been to any of our workshops, you know that I refer to the physiology involved in breath support as the container of your support. And what that container is your ribs, your abdomen, and the bottom of this container is your pelvic floor. So most singers are probably equipped with understanding the middle of the container, which is the abdominals. If you have a really good teacher and you really understand what you're doing, you understand how your ribs, the top of the container, flow into that. But most teachers are not even aware of this, and so they don't even teach it, which is what is the bottom of the container, and that's your pelvic floor. So anatomically speaking, your pelvic floor is your perineum. So that's the muscles between where you pee in the front and where you poop in the back, right? Women and men both have the muscles of the perineum. It's pelvic floor muscles. And it is the muscles that, for example, if you're having a bowel movement, or if you are giving birth, like these are the muscles that are like bearing down to move the bowel movement or the baby, if you're a woman, like out of your body. Okay. Other ways referred to sometimes as Kegel muscles. If you're a woman, men have Kegel muscles too. I believe it's pelvic floor, which is like, you can, if you've ever done Kegel exercises, it's like pulling those muscles up towards your belly button and letting them go. So first of all, understanding where pelvic floor is and what we're talking about when we talk about pelvic floor, we're talking about perineum. Okay. So the muscles between them in the front and them in the back, between your legs. Okay. So now that you understand the physiology, let's talk about what we're actually doing with these muscles and why they're important in helping to stabilize breath support. Because if you guys have followed my content, if you've come to our workshops and we do some really important work on breath support, what you're learning is that the muscles in your lower abdomen and lower back are the muscles that when they flex and engage, they keep the diaphragm stable. They keep your diaphragm low and moving slow so that it doesn't push all the air out of your lungs super quickly, which makes you out of breath before the end of the phrase. It creates tension and strain, and it creates inconsistency. So when we're talking about these muscles of support stabilizing the diaphragm to stay low and move slow, your pelvic floor muscles can actually be even more instrumental in creating that stability. So I want you to, first of all, understand how you can manipulate and move your pelvic floor muscles. So, and this is something that when you do it, like it happens internally, intrinsically, it's not something we can see on the outside. Okay. So if you pull your pelvic floor muscles up towards your belly button, like you're trying not to pee, right? Like, you know, that sensation of like, you have to pee, but you got to hold it because there's no bathroom around, right? So you pull your pelvic floor muscles up towards your belly button so that you don't go to the bathroom. That's pulling your pelvic floor muscles up and in. Okay. Now you can release them, let them go. And you can also bear down on your pelvic floor muscles, which is flexing them down in the opposite direction, which is what I was talking about earlier. Like you're pushing out a poop or you're giving birth and pushing out a baby. Okay. So bear down on your pelvic floor muscles and now go back and forth, pull them up towards your belly button and then press down on them towards your knees. And you can go in both directions. Okay. For singing, we only want to engage the down part. Okay. We don't want to pull them up and in like you're trying not to pee. Okay. We want to go in the down direction. And the reason why, so if you put your hands on your obliques, like on the side diagonal muscles, so you can kind of feel the lower transverse abdominis, and you can also feel the obliques on the side. If you put your hands here and you bear down on your pelvic floor, pay attention to what happens under your hands. Do you feel these muscles? If I bear down on my pelvic floor, you see these muscles flex and engage. I'm not directing these muscles to do anything. I'm bearing down on my pelvic floor, and all these, you can see when I bear down, all these muscles flex and engage that way. And that's really important, because when we do that, we give, because all of these muscles, you guys, the diaphragm is connected to all these muscles, and all these muscles are connected intrinsically to pelvic floor. So when we flex and bear down like we're pooping, basically, this is the direction that it is. It's just what it is. What you do is you stabilize the entire lower part of the container of support, and that stabilizes your diaphragm so that it stays low and it moves slowly to move air out of your lungs for whatever phrase you're singing. Because as you know, without that stability of the diaphragm, if the diaphragm moves up too quickly, then you push all the air out of your lungs too quickly. And that's why the phrase is unstable. That's why you run out of breath. That's because you're pushing too much out. And that's why it's airy. Okay. So pelvic floor is a really great way to send your energy in that direction of stability. Now, the thing about pelvic floor is it's the gentle and consistent kind of flex into it that matters, not the force or the whack of it. Okay. So on a scale of 1 to 10, if you're like super constipated and you're like, trying to push out a poop and you're like, right? Like that's a 10. Like we do not want that for singing, right? Because when you're going that far, like all the other muscles in your body are like, which we don't want. Okay. We just want these pelvic floor muscles isolated and bearing down. I can bear down on them at like a 4 or a 5 on the scale of 10. And that's all we want. Okay. For the longest phrase and the highest note, we might gently flex down into like a 6 max. Okay. So we don't want number 1 to go too far. Okay. So be careful with that. The second thing is that we don't want to go too far, too fast, too soon. So what does that mean? That means me getting to the maximum of my pelvic floor flex, meaning getting as low as I can down into my pelvic floor, either at the beginning of the phrase or at some point in the middle of the phrase. Because if I do, then I got nothing left to flex down into for the rest of the phrase. So we want to gradually, gently flex down through those pelvic floor muscles over the course of the entire phrase. Okay. And if you're singing kind of a short phrase and kind of a phrase that's pretty middle of your range, it's not super rangy, like it's not super high, and if the phrase isn't super long, then we might not really engage much pelvic floor at all. Like if I was going to sing like, I don't know, whoa, like whatever. I don't need pelvic floor for that. It's like the phrase is this long and it's not high, right? But if I'm gonna, tell them how I'm defying gravity, right? I'm getting rangy and it's a little bit of a longer phrase. So I'm gently flexing down into my pelvic floor over the course of the phrase. This is not something that you flex all the way and then you hold. You want to gently move through it over the course of the phrase. So this is something that you can play with. This is also kind of a more, I don't want to say it's a more advanced technique, but it's something that generally you want to be working on with an expert, with a coach, with your voice teacher, if they understand it. If they don't, because they're not going to know how to coach you on it. But if they do, because you just want to make sure that you're doing it right, because it is something that's intrinsic to you. So I can tell whether somebody's using their pelvic floor the right way by the sound that they're making, by what I hear. But it's, it's not something you can like generally like see. Like if you're just standing there like messing with your pelvic floor, it's not something that we can see on the outside. You know what I'm saying? So it's something that you really need to get acquainted with the correct sensation of. And if you're working with an expert who really knows what they're doing, like I can tell you based on the sound that you're making and how you're moving through the phrase, if you're moving with your pelvic floor in the way that you should, so just be aware as you're playing with this, because it is something that can be extremely helpful to you, but can also be something that if you're employing it the wrong way without realizing it, can also be pretty frustrating and pretty detrimental. So I encourage you to play around with pelvic floor over the next few days. The higher you go in your range, the more pelvic floor you need. So if I'm doing a scale and I'm going all the way up into the top of my range, I'm going to be lowering down further into my pelvic floor over the course of that phrase. If I have a very long phrase, I am going to be using that feeling of lowering down into my pelvic floor more and more, gradually spread out over the course of the entire phrase. And that's going to really help me so that my diaphragm doesn't push up or destabilize, and then I'm leaking air left and right. That's why I wouldn't make it to the end of the phrase, right? So being able to feel that consistent, gentle flex and bear down into the pelvic floor over the course of that phrase is going to help you get to the end of that phrase if you're graduating that like in time, right? So if it's like a 16-bar phrase, that's a long phrase. Well, it wouldn't be a 16-bar phrase. Let's say you have an 8-bar phrase. That's a long phrase, right? Like you're going to learn how to gently bear down into your pelvic floor more and more consistently over the course of the 8 bars so that you get to the end. And it works brilliantly. So that's why I wanted to bring it to you guys so that you could play around with it. I see we have a lot of people on live today. Does anybody have any questions about this? Oftentimes when I coach pelvic floor, there can be some confusion because it's not a part of your body that you generally think about. But it's something that you should definitely start to think about, especially when you're doing your vocal exercises. The higher you get, the more pelvic floor you want to employ. So just kind of keep that as the metric in your mind. All right, you guys. Well, if you are intrigued by these ideas and you're thinking to yourself, like these are ideas that my coach has never talked to me about. Yeah, you guys, there's a whole level of like these game-changing high-level tools that most coaches don't know. Like look, I don't want to throw shade, okay? But it's like not all vocal coaches are created equal. They're just not. And like anybody can call themselves an expert vocal coach. Anybody. There's no like certification or whatever, But when we're coaching technique and breath support just based on anatomy, physiology, and physics, that's like how you know, because your body's meant to do this. And so when we tap into the physiology that we are built with and we use it for the most efficient mechanism, then the sound is the best. That's what it is, So if you have teachers who are not doing that, then I encourage you to maybe look around. And if coaching with us is something that you're interested in, get on my calendar for a call. This is not a coaching call. This is just a call to talk about if working in our intensive training program is right for you. So I will, in the chat, after I hop off, I'll put a link to get on my calendar for a call. And this is for singers who are serious, who are ready to take their game to the next level. This is not for dabblers. This is not for singers who are like, I just want to sing better at karaoke. Like, that's awesome. There's other teachers for you. Our intensive training program is a 4-month intensive training program for serious singers who are serious about up-leveling their voice because they're really serious about getting where they want to go in their singing career. So I will put that in the chat for those of you guys who are interested. I see a question. What's the best exercise to practice this? So really, you want to employ pelvic floor in whatever exercise you're singing. Before you do anything, though, it's just getting acquainted of what it feels like to move air and phonate using the mechanism of your pelvic floor. So what you can do is start with a hiss, just like a snake, right? And you want to put your hands here and you want to think gently moving your pelvic floor down, like you're gently, like an elevator. You're like sending the pelvic floor like an elevator all the way down to the ground floor. And you don't want to get to the bottom of the elevator, meaning you don't want to get to the maximum bottom of that flex until you're done with the hiss. So you could practice this like on a 6-beat hiss. And so you would go, so like I'm doing 6 beats, and over those 6 beats, I'm hissing, but I'm like leaning down and out on my pelvic floor and on the lower part of my container. So if I can do 6-beat hiss without doing this, see, that's everything going this way. versus if I use pelvic floor and I keep my ribs out. So I'm going to do 6 beats like that. And if I can do that without collapsing my ribs and without getting to the place where it's too far, too fast, you know, like where you're maxing down, like we don't want that. When you know how to do it consistently and gently, then you do the same thing, and you can do it on a lip trill, just on a single pitch lip trill. Whoops. Like same exact feeling that you felt on the flex. And then you start moving your pitch. So you can do a 1-5-1 lip trill. And as you rise in pitch, you want to gently continue to give yourself a little more stability of down in the pelvic floor. So if this is my pelvic floor, I'm going to go. And then I'll do, if I can get that consistently, then I'll do it higher in my range. And I might do a siren. I might do, or I might do a siren on a yaw. Yeah. And what I'm doing on my pelvic floor is I'm just literally thinking of just like bearing down just a little bit as I move through the phrase. I mean, you can see what it looks like though when I do it is it just looks like I'm flexing, but what I'm not sending my body out. I'm not pushing these muscles out. I'm sending my body down. And when I bear down on pelvic floor, everything flexes with it in the way that we want it to. Yeah. So that you can do. And then you can do it on like an arpeggio. So you could do on whatever vowel you want. It doesn't matter. It's the consistency of the support that we want. Ma, and you can go up higher. Ma, I'm just moving around, you know, I'm just bouncing around. But again, the higher you go in each part of your register, the more pelvic floor that you need. So if I'm high in chest voice, ma, so that for me, where did my keyboard sound go? That pitch is, that was a C sharp in chest voice, and my pelvic floor was really low so that I didn't push everything up and get stuck in my throat. Pelvic floor moves everything away from here, which is what we want. The more things move up towards here, the harder it is for you to hit the notes you want and make it through the phrase, and the more tension you have. Same thing as if I'm, you know, up here, like that. If I'm holding that note, I'm down, 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 down. I'm like visualizing the elevator, just moving all the way through my hips and my knees, all the way down to my feet. So again, there's no like one exercise, right? It's not the exercise that matters. You can practice pelvic floor in any exercise. It's not the what, it's the how. It's the how you do the exercise that matters. So starting to really get acquainted by keeping your hands on you. And if you feel your muscles pushing in, you're not in your pelvic floor. The pelvic floor is pulling up, you're going in that way, which we don't want to do. If you keep your hands on you and you feel the muscles gently flex into your hands and it's subtle, then you stabilize pelvic floor, diaphragm stabilizes, and you just then get the exact right amount of air and speed of air moving through your cords for the best possible sound consistently. Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. You guys, this stuff is literally, it's just science. It's just anatomy and physiology and physics. That's it. And any voice teacher who doesn't teach that, unfortunately, they weren't taught that probably, and they're missing out on being able to explain to their students something that's like so simple and yet so, so important. Now, it's simple. It doesn't always mean it's easy, right? Like you definitely want to check in with an expert to make sure that you're doing this the right way. But like, it is very straightforward. Once you feel it, it's like, it's simple. And it's what creates stability in the best possible way. So good questions, guys. All right, so play around with pelvic floor. If you think coaching in our intensive training program is something that is right for you, if you've had lessons for a long time, you're not a new singer. So you guys, the intensive is not for new singers. And what I mean by that is, you know, you're just kind of starting out with your voice. You know, if you've been hustling and auditioning and performing and recording, and you're still not seeing the results that you want in the form of the big opportunities because your voice is just not showing up to break through that level of impact, that's who this training is for. And that's what we're the very best in the world at. So I will put that in the chat in 1 second as soon as we hop off. And I encourage you to copy and get on my calendar, and we'll talk and see if the program is right for you. I'll walk you through the step-by-step of how we get results for our singers. And if it's a fit, amazing. And if not, that's okay too. All right, guys, mwah, mwah. Have an amazing rest of your week, and I will see you next time. Bye.